The November wind cut through the Montana pines like a knife, carrying with it the scent of snow and something else, something that made Sarah Chen's skin crawl. She stood at her cabin window, watching the distant glow of motorcycle headlights snake through the valley below. The bikers had been gathering for 3 days now, their engines rumbling like distant thunder against the memorial site where her unit had been honored 10 years ago. Sarah pulled her flannel tighter around her shoulders, her fingers unconsciously tracing the scar that ran from her left ear to her collarbone. The doctors had done their best, but some wounds never truly healed. She'd learned to live with the physical reminders of that final mission, the one that had taken everything from her, including Ace. The German shepherd's phantom presence still haunted these walls. Sometimes she'd catch herself setting out too, bowls for dinner, or calling his name when she heard a branch snap in the forest. The grief counselor at the VA had called it complicated mourning, but Sarah knew better. Some bonds transcended death, and hers with Ace had been forged in the crucible of war. She moved away from the window, her bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor. The cabin was sparse, military precise in its organization. A single bed, a small kitchenette, and walls lined with books she'd never quite gotten around to reading. The only personal touch was a photograph on the mantel. Sarah, in full combat gear, kneeling beside a magnificent German shepherd whose intelligent brown eyes seemed to look directly into the camera's lens. "Ace," she whispered to the empty room, as she had every night for the past decade. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." The biker's engines grew louder, closer. Sarah frowned, moving back to the window. They were supposed to be paying respects at the memorial, not heading up the mountain toward her property. She'd chosen this location specifically for its isolation. 40 acres of wilderness between her and the nearest neighbor, with only a single dirt road leading to her door. Her hand instinctively moved to the drawer where she kept her service pistol. Old habits died hard, and something about the approaching convoy set her teeth on edge. These weren't the typical tourist bikers who occasionally passed through the area. Their formation was too organized, too purposeful. Sarah counted the headlights. 12. Bikes, riding in perfect formation. Military precision disguised as civilian recreation. Her pulse quickened as training kicked in, muscle memory overriding the decade of civilian life she'd tried to build. She slipped into the bedroom and pulled on her boots, then returned to the living room to retrieve her weapon. The lead bike crested the hill, its headlights sweeping across her cabin's front porch. Sarah positioned herself behind the kitchen counter, weapon ready but concealed. Through the window she could see the riders dismounting, all wearing leather jackets with no visible patches or insignia. Professional anonymity. A knock came at her door. 3 sharp raps, followed by 2 more. A code she recognized but hadn't heard in years. "Sarah Chen?" The voice was male, authoritative. "We need to talk." She didn't respond immediately, instead, studying the silhouettes visible through her curtains. They'd positioned themselves strategically around her cabin, exits covered, high ground secured. These weren't random bikers. They were operators. "I'm retired," she called out, keeping her voice steady. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." A different voice answered, this one with a slight accent she couldn't place. "We're not here to sell anything, Sergeant Chen. We're here about Ace." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Nobody knew about Ace. The mission files had been classified, the details buried so deep that even her own service record had been sanitized. She'd spent years trying to get answers about what had happened to her partner, only to be met with bureaucratic walls and sympathetic smiles. "Ace is dead," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Has been for 10 years. "That's what they told you," the first voice replied. "But you never believed it, did you? You always wondered why there was no body, no proof. You always felt like something was missing." Sarah's grip tightened on her weapon. They were right, of course. She'd never accepted the official story, never stopped looking for answers. But how could they know that? "What do you want?" she asked. "To show you the truth. But first, you need to see something." something that's been waiting for you. The wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. And then Sarah heard it, a sound that made her heart stop and her knees nearly buckle. A bark, deep, commanding, unmistakably familiar. The weapon slipped from her numb fingers as she stumbled toward the door. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But that bark! She pressed her face against the cold glass of her front door, peering into the darkness beyond the porch light. The bikers had stepped back, forming a loose circle around something she couldn't quite see. And then one of them moved, and Sarah saw him. Ace. Older, scarred, grayer around the muzzle, but unmistakably her partner. He stood in the center of the circle, his massive frame silhouetted against the motorcycle headlights. His ears were erect, his stance alert and ready. He looked exactly as she remembered, except for the years that had passed and the new scars that crisscrossed his thick coat. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as tears blurred her vision. "Ace?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The German shepherd's head turned toward the door, toward her voice. Even through the glass and the distance, she could see his eyes, the same intelligent brown eyes that had haunted her dreams for 10 years. His tail gave a single, tentative wag. "Open the door, Sarah," the first voice said, gentler now. "He's been waiting for you." With shaking hands, Sarah unlocked the door and pulled it open. The November air hit her like a physical blow, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on Ace as he broke away from the circle of bikers and began walking toward her. He moved with the same confident stride she remembered, though she could see the slight stiffness in his gait that spoke of old injuries and hard years. As he climbed the porch steps, Sarah sank to her knees, not trusting her legs to support her. "Ace," she breathed, extending a trembling hand. "Is it really you?" The dog stopped just out of reach, his head tilted as if studying her face. For a moment, Sarah feared he wouldn't recognize her, that the years had erased their bond. But then, Ace stepped forward and pressed his massive head against her palm, the same greeting he'd given her every morning for the 3 years they'd served together. Sarah collapsed forward, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck and burying her face in his thick fur. He smelled of pine and winter air and something else, something that reminded her of the mission, of the day everything went wrong. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed, her fingers tangling in his coat. "They told me you were dead." Ace pulled back and looked at her with those knowing eyes. Then he did something that made her blood run cold. He turned away from her and faced the bikers, his hackles rising. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Not the playful growl of a dog at play, but the warning growl of a predator sensing danger. Sarah looked up at the men who had brought him to her. In the porch light, she could see their faces clearly for the first time. They were all military, or former military. Clean-shaven, alert, wearing civilian clothes that didn't quite hide the shape of concealed weapons. "Who are you?" she asked, slowly getting to her feet. The lead man stepped forward, removing his helmet. Sarah's breath caught. She knew that face. Older, now lined with years and secrets, but unmistakable. "Hello, Sarah," Colonel Reed said, his voice carrying the weight of a decade's worth of lies. "I think it's time we had that conversation." Ace's growl deepened, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of the porch. Sarah had heard him make that sound only once before, in the moments before everything went wrong on their final mission. It was the sound of a dog who had identified a threat, a predator recognizing another predator. "Easy, boy," Sarah whispered, but her hand instinctively moved to where her weapon should have been. She'd dropped it inside when she'd heard Ace's bark, and now she felt exposed, vulnerable. Colonel Reed raised his hand slowly, palms out in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you, Sarah. Either of you." "That's what you said 10 years ago," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "Right before you sent us into that hellhole." Reed's expression flickered. Guilt, regret, or perhaps just annoyance at being reminded of past failures. Things were complicated back then. The mission parameters changed. We had to make hard choices. Hard choices? Sarah's voice rose. You left us to die. You abandoned your own people. I saved who I could, Reed shot back, his composure cracking, including him. He gestured toward Ace, who was now positioned between Sarah and the group of bikers, his body language screaming protection and warning. Sarah looked down at her partner, really studying him for the first time since the shock of seeing him alive had worn off. The scars were more extensive than she'd initially noticed, long, pale lines that spoke of shrapnel and fighting. His left ear was torn, and there was a chunk missing from his right hindquarter. But it was his eyes that told the real story. They held a wariness that hadn't been there before, a depth of knowledge that spoke of survival against impossible odds. "Where has he been?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Surviving," Reed said simply. "Doing what he was trained to do. Waiting. Waiting. Waiting for what? For this moment. For you to be ready to hear the truth." One of the other bikers shifted, and Ace's head snapped toward him, lips pulling back to reveal teeth that were still sharp and white despite his age. The man froze, clearly recognizing the threat. "He doesn't trust you," Sarah observed. "Any of you." "Dogs are good judges of character," Reed replied, but there was something forced about his casual tone. Maybe he remembers things differently than the official report. "What official report?" Sarah demanded. "I was never given a full debriefing. I was told there was an explosion, that Ace was caught in the blast, that his body was never recovered because the site was too dangerous to secure." Reed was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Sarah and Ace. The dog hadn't relaxed his defensive posture, hadn't taken his attention off the group of men who had brought him here. "The explosion was real," Reed said finally. "But it wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something else. Something we never intended." "Stop talking in riddles," Sarah snapped. "If you have something to say, say it." "The mission was a setup," Reed said, the words coming out in a rush. "Not by me, not by our command structure, but someone wanted your unit taken out. Someone with access to classified intelligence. Someone who knew your capabilities and saw you as a threat." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. "That's impossible. We were a handler team. We cleared IEDs and searched for survivors. Who could possibly see us as a threat?" "You found something," Reed said. "In that village. Something you weren't supposed to find. Ace alerted on something that wasn't in the mission briefing." Sarah's mind raced back to that day, to the moments before everything went wrong. They'd been clearing a compound when Ace had suddenly gone rigid, his nose working the air. He'd led her to a secondary structure, a building that wasn't on their maps. Inside, they'd found the files, she breathed, the documents in that back room. Reed nodded grimly. "You photographed them. Standard procedure. But those files contained information that certain people would kill to keep secret." "What kind of information?" "The kind that ends careers and starts wars. The kind that makes inconvenient soldiers and their dogs disappear." Ace suddenly stepped forward, pressing against Sarah's legs. She looked down to see him staring at something behind the group of bikers. A chill ran down her spine as she realized what he was seeing, or rather, what he wasn't seeing. "There's someone else out there," she said quietly. "In the trees." Reed's head snapped up, his casual demeanor evaporating. "What?" "Ace doesn't react to what he can see. He reacts to what he can't. Someone's watching us." The bikers immediately began moving, hands going to concealed weapons. But they were too late. The crack of a sniper rifle echoed across the valley, and one of Reed's men spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. "Get down!" Reed shouted, but Sarah was already moving, muscle memory taking over. She grabbed Ace's collar and pulled him toward the cabin's door, but the dog resisted, his attention focused on something in the darkness beyond the porch light. Another shot rang out, this one splintering the porch railing inches from Sarah's head. She dove for the door, Ace following, and they tumbled into the cabin together. Behind them, she could hear Reed shouting orders, the sound of motorcycle engines starting up. Sarah crawled to the window and peered out. The bikers were scattering, using their bikes for cover as they returned fire into the forest. Reed was crouched behind his Harley, speaking rapidly into a radio. 10 years, Sarah whispered to Ace, who was pressed against her side. 10 years I've been hiding up here, and now this. Ace whined softly, a sound she remembered from their time together. He was trying to tell her something, but she couldn't understand what. She'd lost that ability somewhere in the decade of grief and isolation. The gunfire outside suddenly stopped. Sarah held her breath listening. The silence was more terrifying than the shooting had been. Reed's voice came from the porch. "Sarah, are you hit?" "I'm fine," she called back. "What about your men? We're okay, but we need to move. Whoever's out there, they're not here for a friendly chat." Sarah looked down at Ace, who was still staring at the door with an intensity that made her nervous. "You know something, don't you, boy? You know who's out there." Ace turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her blood run cold. Not fear, not confusion, but recognition. He knew exactly who was hunting them. "Sarah," Reed called again, his voice more urgent now. "We need to go. Now." She pressed her face against the window, trying to see into the darkness beyond. The porch light. The forest was silent, empty of movement. But she could feel eyes watching, waiting. "Who else knew about the mission?" she called out to Reed. "Who else knew what we found?" Reed's silence was answer enough. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. In her mind, the puzzle she'd been trying to solve for 10 years suddenly becoming clear. "You didn't come here to tell me the truth," she said quietly. "You came here to finish what you started 10 years ago." Ace pressed closer to her side, his body trembling with suppressed energy. He was ready to fight, ready to protect her just as he had all those years ago. But from whom? Sarah looked at the photograph on her mantel. Herself and Ace in their younger days, when the world had seemed simpler, when she'd believed in the mission and the men who gave the orders. "That dog is dead," she heard Reed whisper to one of his men outside. "That dog is supposed to be dead." But Ace wasn't dead. He was here, real and solid and warm against her side, and he was trying to tell her something important, something that would change everything. The question was she ready to listen? 10 years earlier, the morning of the mission dawned clear and hot, the kind of desert heat that made metal burn to the touch and turned the inside of a Humvee into an oven. Sarah Chen adjusted her body armor and checked her gear one final time, running through the mental checklist that had become second nature after 18 months in country. Ace lay in the shade beside her, panting slightly, but alert. His brown eyes tracked every movement in the forward operating base, cataloging threats and filing away information with the efficiency of a born soldier. At 3 years old, he was at the peak of his abilities. 100 pounds of muscle, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty. "You ready for this, boy?" Sarah asked, scratching behind his ears. Ace's tail thumped once against the ground, his version of a confident yes. The mission briefing had been straightforward. A village 12 kilometers south had been hit by insurgents 3 days earlier. Intelligence suggested there might be survivors trapped in collapsed buildings, and the area needed to be cleared of any remaining explosive devices. Standard search and rescue, the kind of operation Sarah and Ace had run dozens of times. "Chen," Sergeant Williams called from across the staging area. "Colonel wants to see you." Sarah found Colonel Reed in the command tent, bent over a map table with 2 men she didn't recognize. Both wore civilian clothes, but their bearings screamed military intelligence. Reed looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Change of plans," he said without preamble. "We're adding a secondary objective to your mission." Sarah frowned. "Sir?" Reed pointed to a building on the map, circled in red ink. "Intelligence believes there may be documents in this structure. High-value intelligence. If you find anything, photograph it and get out." "What kind of documents?" One of the civilians stepped forward. "Financial records, communication logs, anything that might help us understand the insurgent network in this area." Sarah studied the map. The building was on the outskirts of the village, isolated from the main search area. "That's going to add at least 2 hours to our mission time." "Can't be helped," Reed said. "This is priority 1 now. The search and rescue is secondary." Something about the way he said it bothered Sarah, but she nodded anyway. "Understood, sir." As she turned to leave, Reed called her back. "Chen, be careful. Out there, something feels off about this one." Sarah looked back at him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. "Is there something you're not telling me, sir?" "Just trust your instincts," Reed said. "And trust your dog. If Ace alerts on something that doesn't feel right, you get out of there. Mission be damned. Present day. Present day." Sarah blinked back to the present, Reed's words from a decade ago echoing in her mind. "Trust your dog. If Ace alerts on something that doesn't feel right, you get out of there." Ace was alerting now, his body rigid with tension as he stared at the cabin door. Outside, the forest had gone silent. No wind, no insects, no night sounds. Just the heavy quiet that came before violence. "You remember, don't you?" Sarah whispered to him. "You remember what happened that day. 10 years earlier, the village had been a nightmare. Bodies in the street, buildings reduced to rubble, the smell of smoke and death hanging in the air like a shroud. Sarah and Ace had worked methodically through the debris, searching for survivors but finding only corpses. It was Ace who had found the first ID, buried under a pile of concrete near what had been the marketplace. His sudden stillness, ears, forward, nose working the air, had saved both their lives. Sarah had marked the location and called it in, then moved on to the next building. They'd been working for 3 hours when Ace suddenly bolted, racing toward the building Reed had circled. On the map, Sarah had followed, her heart pounding as she tried to keep up with her partner's urgent pace. The building was intact, unusual in a village that had been systematically destroyed. Ace had gone straight to a side entrance, then stopped, his hackles rising. Sarah had drawn her weapon, suddenly aware that something was very wrong. The door had been unlocked. Inside, the building was empty except for a single room in the back, a room that hadn't been on any of their intelligence maps. The room had been full of filing cabinets, computer equipment, and boxes of documents. Sarah had started photographing everything, working quickly while Ace stood guard. The documents were in multiple languages: Arabic, English, Pashto, financial records, as the civilian had said, but not insurgent finances. These were American bank accounts, weapons shipments, names and dates that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was Ace who had heard them coming first. His low growl had been the only warning before the explosion that had brought the building down around them. Present day. "They were waiting for us," Sarah said aloud, the truth finally clicking into place. "They knew we'd find those documents. They wanted us to find them." Reed's voice came through the door, tense and urgent. "Sarah, we need to move. Now." But Sarah wasn't listening to Reed anymore. She was listening to Ace, who had suddenly gone from tense alertness to something else. Excitement? Recognition? His tail was wagging slightly, and he was looking at the back door of the cabin. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, but Ace was already moving, padding silently toward the kitchen. Sarah followed, her heart pounding. Through the kitchen window, she could see a figure moving through the trees. Not Reed's men, not the mysterious sniper. Someone else. Someone Ace recognized. The figure stepped into the moonlight, and Sarah's breath caught. It was a woman, tall and lean, wearing military fatigues. She moved with the fluid grace of a professional soldier, and something about her silhouette seemed familiar. The woman stopped at the edge of the tree line and raised her hand in a gesture Sarah recognized, the hand signal for safe. Ace whined, softly, his whole body vibrating with suppressed energy. Sarah opened the back door quietly, and the woman approached. As she got closer, Sarah could see her face clearly for the first time. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of alert awareness that came from years of combat training. But it was her eyes that made Sarah's heart skip. Intelligent brown eyes that seemed to look right through her. "You're Sarah Chen," the woman said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Who are you?" The woman smiled slightly. "Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time. Someone who knows what really happened on that mission 10 years ago." She knelt down, and Ace immediately trotted over to her, his tail wagging furiously. The woman scratched behind his ears with the easy familiarity of someone who had known him for years. "Hello, Ace," she said softly. "I told you we'd find her." Sarah stared at the woman, at Ace's obvious affection for her, at the way she moved, and spoke with military precision. "Who are you?" she asked again. The woman stood and extended her hand. "Staff Sergeant Lisa Park. I was supposed to die in that explosion with you. Instead, I've been hunting the people who tried to kill us." Sarah's world tilted. Lisa Park had been in her unit, the communications specialist who had been coordinating their mission from the forward operating base. She'd been nowhere near the explosion. "That's impossible," Sarah said. "You were back at base. You were safe." Lisa's smile was grim. "That's what they wanted everyone to think. But I was there, Sarah. I was in that building with you when it came down. I was the one who pulled you out of the rubble. But they said a lot of things. Most of them lies." Lisa looked toward the front of the cabin, where Reed and his men were still waiting. "The question is, are you ready to learn the truth about what really happened that day?" Ace pressed against Sarah's legs, and she could feel his steady heartbeat against her thigh. He was calm now, no longer alert for danger. He trusted this woman, and after 10 years of doubting her own memories, Sarah decided to trust him. "Tell me," she said. 3 days had passed since Lisa Park had melted back into the forest like a ghost, taking with her the promise of answers and leaving Sarah with more questions than ever. Reed and his men had left that same night, their motorcycles disappearing into the darkness after a heated argument between Reed and someone on his radio. Sarah hadn't slept well since then. Every sound in the forest made her reach for the weapon. She now kept within arm's reach. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. But it was Ace's behavior that worried her most. The dog had changed since that night. He was more alert, more protective, but there was something else, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. He would disappear for hours at a time, returning with pine needles in his coat and dirt under his nails, as if he'd been digging. On the third night, Sarah woke to the sound of scratching at her door. She lay in bed for a moment, listening, her hand moving instinctively to the pistol on her nightstand. The scratching came again, rhythmic, deliberate, not random. She slipped out of bed and padded to the front door, weapon in hand. Through the peephole, she could see nothing but darkness. But the scratching continued, and now she could hear breathing, panting. "Ace?" she called softly. The scratching stopped. Sarah unlocked the door and opened it carefully, her weapon ready. Ace sat on the porch, his massive frame silhouetted against the starlight. But there was something in his mouth, something that gleamed dully in the moonlight. "What do you have there, boy?" Sarah asked, holstering her weapon. Ace dropped the object at her feet and stepped back, his tail wagging slightly. Sarah knelt and picked it up, her breath catching as she recognized what it was. A military patch. Not American, the colors and design were wrong, but it was definitely military, and it was old. The fabric was faded, the edges frayed, but the emblem was still clearly visible, a stylized wolf's head over crossed swords. "Where did you get this, Ace?" Sarah asked, but the dog was already moving, heading toward the edge of the porch. He stopped and looked back at her, clearly expecting her to follow. Sarah looked at the patch again, turning it over in her hands. On the back, barely visible in the dim light, was a series of numbers: 47.32 hard Otion Wadigau N, 109.6329° W coordinates. Sarah's pulse quickened. She'd been a soldier long enough to recognize GPS coordinates when she saw them. These pointed to somewhere in Montana, somewhere not far from her current location. "You want to show me something, don't you?" she said to Ace. The dog's tail wagged once, then he turned and trotted toward the forest. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before following, grabbing a flashlight and her weapon. The forest was eerily quiet as they moved through the trees. Ace seemed to know exactly where he was going, his path never wavering as he led her deeper into the wilderness. Sarah followed, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, her senses alert for any sign of danger. After 20 minutes of walking, Ace stopped beside a massive pine tree. The tree was old, its trunk easily 6 feet in diameter, its branches reaching up into the starlit sky. Ace began digging at the base of the tree, his powerful claws sending dirt and pine needles flying. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, but she could already see that the ground here had been disturbed before. The earth was loose, easier to dig than the surrounding soil. She knelt beside Ace and began helping him dig, using her hands to scrape away the soft earth. Within minutes, her fingers encountered something hard and smooth: metal. Working together, they uncovered a military-style ammunition box, the kind used to protect sensitive equipment from the elements. The box was locked, but Sarah recognized the type of lock, standard military issue, the kind she could pick with her eyes closed. Using her knife, she worked at the lock until it clicked open. Inside the box, wrapped in plastic, were several items that made Sarah's blood run cold. A field journal, its pages yellowed with age, a photograph, the image barely visible in the darkness, and a small metal object that Sarah recognized immediately: a dog tag. A dog tag. She picked up the photograph and shone her flashlight on it. The image showed 2 people: a woman in military fatigues and a man in civilian clothes. The woman looked familiar, but Sarah couldn't place her. The man was completely unknown. But it was the back of the photograph that made Sarah's hands tremble. In fading ink, someone had written, "Before the procedure, SC and Subject 7. SC, Sarah Chen." But who was Subject 7, and what procedure were they referring to? Sarah picked up the dog tag and read the inscription: Chen, Sarah, M, 123, 45, 6789. O. Neg, Methodist, her own dog tag. But that was impossible. She was wearing her dog tags, had been wearing them for 10 years. She pulled them out from under her shirt and compared them to the one in the box. They were identical. Down to the smallest detail, the scratches and wear patterns, everything. But that couldn't be right. She'd been wearing her tags when she was pulled from the rubble, had been wearing them when she woke up in the military hospital. Unless... Sarah opened the field journal with shaking hands. The pages were filled with handwriting she didn't recognize, but the content made her stomach turn. Day 1. Subject 7, showing signs of memory integration. Physical conditioning progressing as expected. Psychological profile matches original within. Acceptable parameters. Day 7. Subject 7 has fully integrated primary memories. Secondary memories showing 73% retention rate. Bond with K9 unit stronger than anticipated. Day 14. Final phase complete. Subject 7 ready for deployment. Original asset has been disposed of. Project Lazarus successful. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the journal. Subject 7. Project Lazarus. Original asset disposed of. What does this mean? She whispered to Ace. But the dog was staring at something behind her. Sarah spun around, her weapon coming up instinctively. A figure stood at the edge of the flashlight beam. Lisa Park, dressed in dark fatigues, her face grim. It means, Lisa said quietly, that you're not who you think you are. Sarah kept her weapon trained on Lisa, her mind racing. What are you talking about? Lisa stepped closer, her hands raised peacefully. Sarah Chen died in that explosion 10 years ago. Her body was recovered from the rubble along with her dog tags. She nodded toward the items in the box. Those are hers, the real ones. That's impossible. I'm Sarah Chen. I have her memories, her training, her clone, Lisa finished. You're a clone, Sarah, a perfect genetic copy, implanted with edited memories and trained to believe you're the original. Sarah's weapon wavered. You're lying. Am I? Think about it. How much do you remember from before the mission? Really remember, not just the official version you've been told. Can you recall your childhood? Your parents? The day you enlisted? Sarah tried to remember, reaching back into her past, but the memories felt fuzzy, uncertain, like looking at photographs instead of experiencing real events. The real Sarah Chen discovered something in that building, Lisa continued. Something that threatened very powerful people. So they arranged for her to die, and they replaced her with you, a more controllable version. Then why doesn't it work? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why don't I remember everything? Why are there gaps? Lisa smiled sadly. Because of him. She nodded toward Ace, who was still sitting calmly beside the pine tree. The bond between a handler and their dog is deeper than any technology can replicate. Ace knew you weren't the original Sarah, but he also knew you were still her in the ways that mattered. His loyalty to you kept parts of your real personality intact. Sarah looked down at Ace, who was watching her with those intelligent brown eyes. You've been protecting me all this time, haven't you? Even when I didn't know I needed protecting. Ace's tail wagged once, and he pressed against her legs. The simple gesture broke something inside Sarah's chest, a dam of emotion that had been building for 10 years. Who am I, really? She asked Lisa. You're Sarah Chen, Lisa replied. Not the original, but the one who survived, the one who remembered enough to keep questioning, to keep searching for the truth, the one who was strong enough to resist the programming. Sarah looked at the items in the box, then back at Lisa. And you? Where do you fit into all this? Lisa's expression darkened. I was the mission's communications specialist. I was also the one who was supposed to kill you if you discovered the truth. Instead, I helped you escape. I've been hunting the people responsible ever since. Why? Because they didn't just kill Sarah Chen. They killed everyone who knew what she found in that building. My entire unit, Sarah. Everyone except you, me, and Ace. And they're not done yet. As if summoned by her words, the sound of helicopter, rotors filled the air. Lisa's head snapped up, her face going pale. They found us, she said. We need to go. Now. Sarah looked at the evidence scattered around the base of the pine tree. The photograph, the journal, the dog tags. The truth. About her existence, about who she really was. Leave it, Lisa urged. We can't carry it all and they'll find it anyway. But Sarah was already moving, stuffing the items back into the ammunition box. No, this is the only proof we have. The only way to make them pay for what they did. The helicopter sounds were getting closer. Through the trees, Sarah could see searchlights sweeping the forest floor. Ace, she called, but the dog was already at her side, alert and ready to move. Sarah secured the ammunition box under her arm and followed Lisa deeper into the forest, away from the approaching aircraft. They ran through the darkness, branches, tearing at their clothes, roots threatening to trip them with every step. Behind them, the helicopters were landing, and Sarah could hear voices shouting orders, the sound of boots hitting the ground. "This way," Lisa hissed, leading them toward a rocky outcropping that would provide cover from the searchlights. "There's a cave system here. We can lose them in the tunnels." As they reached the rocks, Sarah turned back for one last look at the pine tree where Ace had led her to the truth. The searchlights were converging on the area, and she could see armed figures moving through the forest. "They're not going to stop," she said to Lisa. "Are they?" Lisa's face was grim in the darkness. "No, they can't afford to let us live. We know too much." Sarah clutched the ammunition box tighter, feeling the weight of the evidence inside, the proof of her true nature, of the conspiracy that had stolen her life and murdered her friends. Then, "We make sure the truth gets out," she said quietly. "Whatever it takes." Ace pressed against her leg, and Sarah felt a surge of determination. She might not be the original Sarah Chen, but she was still a soldier, and soldiers didn't abandon their missions. The hunt was just beginning. The cave system was more extensive than Sarah had imagined, stretching deep into the mountain like a network of veins. Lisa moved through the tunnels with the confidence of someone who had mapped every passage, every dead end, every possible escape route. They'd been walking for hours, the ammunition box growing heavier with each step. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had faded, but Sarah knew their hunters were still out there, systematically searching every possible hiding place. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked as they paused in a wider chamber to rest. "About what?" "I am." Lisa sat down on a rock ledge, her face barely visible in the dim light of Sarah's flashlight. "I suspected from the moment I saw you in that hospital bed. The real Sarah had a scar on her left shoulder from a training accident. You don't." Sarah unconsciously touched her shoulder, feeling the unmarked skin beneath her shirt. "But you didn't say anything." "What was I supposed to say? Hey, you're a clone of a dead soldier and everyone you trusted is trying to kill you?" "I figured you'd been through enough." Sarah laughed bitterly. "So you just watched me for 10 years. "I protected you," Lisa corrected. "Those hunting accidents that happened to men asking questions about your unit. The bureaucrats who suddenly got transferred when they got too close to classified files. The witnesses who decided to keep quiet about what they'd seen. That was me." Sarah stared at her. "You killed people." "I killed the right people," Lisa said simply. "The ones who were part of the conspiracy. The ones who ordered the deaths of our friends." "Our friends." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Lisa pulled out a photograph from her pocket, old and creased from handling. It showed a group of soldiers in desert fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Sarah recognized some of the faces. Rodriguez, the medic who had always shared his MREs. Thompson, the radio man who told terrible jokes. Williams, the squad leader who had recommended Sarah for handler training. They were all supposed to die in that explosion, Lisa said, but when they survived, the people behind this had to find other ways to eliminate them. Sarah studied the photograph, her enhanced memory cataloging every detail. "Tell me what happened to them." Lisa's voice was flat, emotionless. "Rodriguez died in a car accident 6 months after we got back. Brake failure. Thompson overdosed on heroin. Funny thing is, he never used drugs. Williams was killed in a home invasion robbery where nothing was stolen. And the others disappeared. One by one, they just vanished. No forwarding addresses, no contact with family, no trace, like they never existed." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. "How many?" 12 soldiers, plus 2 handlers and their dogs, all dead or missing within 3 years of the mission. Except you and me." Lisa nodded. "They kept you alive because you were useful. The perfect soldier with the perfect memory gaps. They could point you at a target and know you'd complete the mission without asking inconvenient questions. But I never got another assignment. I was discharged on medical leave. Because they realized they'd made a mistake. Ace's loyalty to you was stronger than their programming. You were starting to remember things, starting to ask questions. So, they stuck you up here in the middle of nowhere and hoped you'd stay quiet. Sarah looked at Ace, who was lying at her feet, his ears constantly swiveling to catch the slightest sound. But you never stayed quiet, did you, boy? You kept looking for the truth. Dogs don't lie, Lisa said. They don't forget, and they don't forgive. Ace knew something was wrong from the beginning. He's been trying to tell you for 10 years. Sarah opened the ammunition box and pulled out the field journal, flipping through the pages by flashlight. Most of the entries were clinical, detached observations about Subject 7's progress. But near the end, the handwriting changed, became more urgent. Day 23. Subject 7 showing signs of memory bleed-through. Original personality traits emerging despite conditioning. Recommend immediate termination and replacement with Subject 8. Day 25. K9 unit exhibiting protective behavior toward Subject 7. Unusual loyalty patterns. Recommend separation. Day 27. Subject 7 has discovered inconsistencies in implanted memories, becoming suspicious of handlers. Project Lazarus compromised. Day 30. Facility breach. Subject 7 and K9 unit missing. All personnel to assume positions. Orders are to terminate on site. Sarah closed the journal, her hands shaking. They tried to kill me even then, before I knew anything. You escaped, Lisa said, with Ace's help. But they caught up to you at the cabin. That's when they staged the explosion, made it look like you died in the blast. But I didn't die. No, you were badly injured, but you survived. They found you in the rubble and decided to improvise. Told you that you were the original Sarah Chen, that you'd been injured in the explosion, that your memory problems were from head trauma. Sarah touched the scar on her face, the one the doctors had said was from shrapnel. This isn't from the explosion. No, that's from the surgery. They had to alter your facial features slightly to match the original Sarah's. Your bone structure was close, but not perfect. The truth was overwhelming, like being buried under an avalanche of lies and deception. Sarah felt like she was drowning in it, struggling to find something solid to hold on to. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Why not just let me go on believing I was her?" Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "Because they're coming for you. The people who created you, who controlled you, who used you. They've decided you're too dangerous to let live. Because of what I might remember, because of what you might have already remembered. The real Sarah Chen didn't just find financial records in that building. She found something else, something that could bring down the entire operation." Sarah felt a flicker of something, not quite memory, but familiarity. Like déjà vu, but stronger. What kind of something? "A list," Lisa said. "Names, dates, bank accounts, proof that American military operations were being sold to the highest bidder, that classified intelligence was being traded for personal profit, that soldiers were being sent to die to cover up the evidence. And, you think I still have it? This list? I think the real Sarah hid it somewhere, and I think she left clues for you to find it." Sarah looked at Ace, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes. "You know where it is, don't you? You've been trying to show me." Ace's tail wagged once, barely visible in the darkness. "Where?" Sarah asked. "Where did she hide it?" But before Ace could respond, the sound of voices echoed through the cave system. Distant, but getting closer. Their pursuers had found the entrance. "We need to move," Lisa whispered, gathering her gear. "There's another exit about a mile deeper in the mountain." Sarah secured the ammunition box and followed Lisa into the darkness, Ace padding silently beside them. Behind them, the voices were getting louder, more urgent. "How many of them are there?" Sarah asked. "Too many," Lisa replied. "But they don't know these caves like I do. We can still lose them." As they moved deeper into the mountain, Sarah's mind was racing. The list, the evidence, the proof of conspiracy that had cost so many lives. It was still out there, hidden by a woman who had died to protect it, a woman who had been her, but wasn't her. A woman whose face she wore, whose memories she carried, whose dog had never stopped loving her. "I'm going to find it," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever the real Sarah hid, wherever she put it, I'm going to find it, and I'm going to make them pay." Lisa smiled grimly in the darkness. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." The hunt was far from over. But now, finally, Sarah knew what she was hunting for. The exit from the cave system opened onto a narrow ledge halfway up the mountain, hidden behind a waterfall that cascaded down the rocky face. Dawn was breaking over the valley below, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Sarah of mornings in the desert, of a life she couldn't be sure she'd actually lived. Lisa led them along a treacherous path that wound around the mountain, staying hidden from the helicopters that continued to circle the area. They'd been walking for 2 hours when Ace suddenly stopped, his ears perked, his body going rigid. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. Ace moved away from the path, heading toward a cluster of pine trees that grew in a natural depression in the mountainside. He began digging immediately, his powerful claws sending dirt and pine needles flying. "Another cache?" Lisa asked, but Sarah was already kneeling beside the dog, helping him uncover whatever lay buried beneath the trees. This time, they found something different. Not a metal box, but a wooden trapdoor, weathered and camouflaged with dirt and debris. The hinges were rusted, but still functional. Sarah pulled it open to reveal a narrow shaft that descended into darkness. "A bunker," Lisa breathed. "She built a bunker." Sarah shone her flashlight down the shaft, revealing a ladder that led to a small underground chamber. The walls were lined with plastic sheeting, and the air that rose from below was dry and stale. "You was preparing for this," Sarah said. "The real Sarah. She knew they'd come after her." "Or she knew they'd come after you," Lisa replied. "Maybe she left this for you to find." Sarah went down the ladder first, Ace following with surprising agility for his size. The chamber was small but well organized, like a military supply depot. Shelves lined the walls, filled with canned food, water, medical supplies, and ammunition. But it was the desk in the center of the room that drew Sarah's attention. It was covered with papers, photographs, and maps, all held down by rocks to prevent them from shifting. A battery-powered lantern sat in the center, and when Sarah turned it on, the chamber was filled with warm, yellow light. The walls were covered with photographs and documents, connected by string and pins like a detective's investigation board. Sarah recognized some of the faces. Reed, the civilians from the mission briefing, soldiers from her unit. Others were strangers, but all had the same hard-eyed look of professional killers. "Jesus," Lisa whispered, studying the wall. She mapped the entire conspiracy. Sarah moved to the desk and began examining the papers. Most were photocopies of military documents, financial records, and communication logs. But there were also personal items. AE, dog collar, pristine and unmarked, with a single word engraved on the nameplate, "Remember." Sarah picked up the collar, feeling its weight in her hands. The metal was cold, unscratched, as if it had never been worn. But when she held it up to the light, she could see that the engraving was fresh, done with precision and care. "She made this for Ace," Sarah said. "The real Sarah. She knew what was going to happen to her, and she wanted to make sure he'd remember." Ace whined softly, pressing against Sarah's legs. She knelt down and fastened the collar around his neck, next to the worn one he'd been wearing for 10 years. The weight of it seemed to settle something in the dog's posture, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a document taped to the wall. "It's a medical report from the cloning facility." Sarah read over Lisa's shoulder, her blood growing cold with each line. The report detailed the process of creating a genetic duplicate, the surgical procedures required to alter facial features, the psychological conditioning used to implant false memories. Subject 7 shows optimal integration of implanted memories. Sarah read aloud. Physical conditioning progressing ahead of schedule. Psychological profile indicates high probability of mission success. Mission success, Lisa repeated. They didn't just create you to replace Sarah. They created you to be a weapon. Sarah continued reading, her hands shaking. Enhanced reflexes, improved marksmanship, resistance to interrogation techniques. Jesus, Lisa, they turned me into a killing machine. But it didn't work, Lisa pointed out. You're not a mindless assassin. You're sitting here, questioning everything, refusing to follow orders. That's not the behavior of a programmed weapon. Sarah looked at Ace, who was watching her with those intelligent brown eyes. Because of him. The bond between us was too strong to break completely. She moved to another section of the wall, where a series of photographs showed the same location from different angles. It was a compound of some kind, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. In the center was a large building with no windows, like a prison or a laboratory. "Where is this?" Sarah asked. Lisa studied the photographs. "I don't know, but look at the notation in the corner." Sarah squinted at the small text written in the margin of one photo. Cavern 9, Final Phase. Cavern 9, Sarah repeated. That's where they created me, and where they'll create your replacement if we don't stop them. Sarah turned back to the desk, searching through the papers for more information about the facility. Most of the documents were heavily redacted, but she found a hand-drawn map showing the compound's layout, with notes in Sarah's own handwriting. Underground levels, she read. Labs 1-5 on Sub-Level 2, Archives on Sub-Level 3, Termination Chambers. On Sub-Level 4, Termination Chambers? Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah found another document, this one a shipping manifest. It listed medical supplies, surgical equipment, and biological waste disposal services. The quantities were staggering, enough to support dozens of operations. They're not just cloning soldiers, Sarah said. They're running a factory, creating replacements for anyone who becomes inconvenient. Or anyone who discovers the truth, Lisa added. Sarah gathered the most important documents and stuffed them into her pack. The evidence was overwhelming. Proof of illegal human experimentation, murder, conspiracy at the highest levels of government. But she needed more. She needed the list that the real Sarah had died protecting. "It's not here," she said, looking around the chamber. "The list. This is all supporting evidence, but the primary target, the names, the bank accounts, the proof of who's really behind this. It's somewhere else." Lisa frowned. Maybe she hid it separately, as insurance. Sarah was about to respond when a new sound echoed through the chamber, a mechanical whirring that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The lights flickered, and suddenly a section of the wall swung open, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside was a small device about the size of a smartphone, with a screen that had just activated. Text was scrolling across the display, and Sarah recognized the voice synthesis pattern immediately. It was her own voice, or rather, the voice of the original Sarah Chen. "If you're reading this," the device said in Sarah's voice, "then you've found the first cache. But you're not done yet. The real evidence is hidden where only I would think to look, where only Ace would know to lead you." The device paused, and Sarah could hear the original Sarah's breathing, could imagine her sitting in this very chamber, recording a message for a future she knew she wouldn't live to see. "I know what you are," the voice continued. "I know what they did to you, and I know why. But you're not their weapon. You're my legacy. You're the one who will finish what I started." The screen displayed a set of coordinates, different from the ones on the military patch but still in Montana. "Still close. Trust Ace," the original Sarah's voice said. "He's been waiting for you to remember. He's been waiting for you to come home." The device went dark, and the chamber fell silent. Sarah looked at the coordinates, then at Ace, who was watching her with an expression that seemed almost human in its intensity. "You know where this is, don't you?" she asked him. Ace's tail wagged once and he moved toward the ladder. But before Sarah could follow, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air above them. Their pursuers had found the trap door. Time to go, Lisa said, grabbing her gear. "They'll be down here in minutes." Sarah took one last look around the chamber, at the evidence the real Sarah had so carefully compiled. Then she followed Lisa and Ace up the ladder, into the morning light, and toward whatever final revelation awaited them. The hunt was almost over, but the most dangerous part was just beginning. The coordinates led them deeper into the wilderness, away from the main roads and hiking trails into a part of the forest that seemed untouched by civilization. The trees grew thicker here, their canopy blocking out most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight that made every shadow seem threatening. Ace moved with purpose, no longer following scent trails but navigating by some internal compass that had been calibrated 10 years ago. Sarah and Lisa followed, their senses alert for any sign of pursuit. The helicopters had given up their search an hour ago, but Sarah knew their hunters wouldn't stop. They were too close to the truth now. "How much further?" Lisa asked, checking her GPS device. "We're close," Sarah replied, though she wasn't sure how she knew. Something about this place felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream. They crested a small hill and found themselves looking down into a hidden valley. At the bottom, barely visible through the trees, was a structure that didn't belong in the wilderness. A mobile trailer, the kind used by construction crews or military units for temporary housing. "That's not on any map," Lisa said, studying. Her GPS, Sarah pulled out binoculars and examined the trailer. It was old but well-maintained, with solar panels on the roof and what looked like a sophisticated communications array. Smoke was rising from a chimney, and she could see movement behind the windows. "Someone's home," she said. Ace was all ready, moving down the hillside, his tail wagging with excitement. Sarah and Lisa followed, weapons ready but not drawn. If this was another trap, they'd know soon enough. The trailer sat in a clearing that had been carved out of the forest with military precision. A generator hummed quietly beside a small shed, and Sarah could see the glint of surveillance cameras, mounted on the surrounding trees. Whoever lived here took security seriously. They were 50 yards from the trailer when the door opened and a man stepped out onto the small porch. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of working with his hands. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, but his posture was unmistakably military. "You finally showed up," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "I was starting to think she'd been wrong about you." Sarah stopped, her hand moving, instinctively to her weapon. "Who are you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Tom Briggs. I used to fix your vehicles, back when you were someone else." Recognition hit Sarah like a physical blow. Tom Briggs, the mechanic who had kept their convoy running through the desert, the man who could fix anything with spare parts, and determination, the man who had been listed as killed in action 6 months after their final mission. "You're supposed to be dead," Sarah said. "So are you," Tom replied. "But here we are, having a conversation. Come on inside. We have a lot to talk about." The interior of the trailer was a maze of electronic equipment, computer screens, and filing cabinets. Maps covered every wall, marked with pins and string like the bunker Sarah had discovered. But these maps were different. They showed locations all over the world, connected by lines that suggested a global network of some kind. "Coffee?" Tom asked, moving to a small kitchenette. "I know it's not much, but it's better than MRE coffee." "MRE coffee." "I don't want coffee," Sarah said. "I want answers." Tom poured himself a cup and sat down at a cluttered desk. "I figured you would. That's why I've been waiting for you." "Waiting for what? For me to figure out that I'm not who I think I am? For me to discover that my entire life is a lie?" "I've been waiting for you to remember," Tom said quietly. to become who you were meant to be. Lisa stepped forward, her weapon drawn. Cut the cryptic bullshit. What do you know about Sarah? Tom looked at her with interest. Staff Sergeant. Lisa Park, the communications specialist who went rogue. I wondered when you'd show up. How do you— I know because I've been tracking all of you, Tom interrupted. Every survivor, every clone, every replacement. It's what I do now. It's what I've been doing for 10 years. He gestured to the screens around them, which Sarah now realized were showing live feeds from various locations. Military bases, government, buildings, what looked like research facilities. You see, Tom continued, I was there when they pulled you out of the rubble. I was the one who transported you to the cloning facility. I was the one who helped them create you. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. You worked for them. I worked for the military, Tom corrected. I followed orders, just like you did. Just like we all did. But when I realized what they were really doing, when I understood the scope of what they'd created— He trailed off, staring at one of the screens. I tried to stop it, tried to expose them, but they had too much power, too many resources. So I disappeared, became a ghost, and I've been fighting them ever since. Fighting how? Lisa asked. Tom smiled grimly. You know those accidents that happened to key personnel? The bureaucrats. Who suddenly got transferred? The witnesses who decided to keep quiet? That wasn't all Lisa's work. Sarah looked around the trailer at the sophisticated equipment, the surveillance feeds, the evidence of a one-man war against a vast conspiracy. You've been protecting us. I've been protecting the truth, Tom said, and you're the key to exposing it. Me? Why me? Because you're not just a clone, Tom said. You're something else, something they didn't expect. He moved to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. When they created you, they tried to copy Sarah's memories, her personality, her skills, but they couldn't copy her soul. They couldn't copy the bond between her and Ace. Sarah looked at the dog, who was lying at her feet, still wearing both collars. What are you saying? I'm saying that you're not just a replacement for Sarah Chen. You're an evolution. You have her memories, her training, her experiences, but you also have something else, something that makes you more dangerous to them than the original ever was. Tom opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed Sarah, the real Sarah, standing beside a man in a white lab coat. Behind them was a massive complex of buildings, surrounded by mountains. This is Cavern 9, Tom said, the facility where they created you, where they're still creating others. And this is Dr. Marcus Webb, the man who designed the cloning process. Sarah studied the photograph. Something about the man's face was familiar, but she couldn't place him. Dr. Webb made a mistake, Tom continued. He thought he could create the perfect soldier by combining genetic replication with psychological conditioning, but he underestimated the power of emotional bonds. The connection between you and Ace was too strong to break. So what happened? You started to remember, not consciously, but on a deeper level. Your subconscious began to reject the implanted memories, to search for the truth. And Ace never forgot. He knew you weren't the original Sarah, but he also knew you were still Sarah in the ways that mattered. Tom pulled out another document. A medical report with Sarah's photograph clipped to the top. They realized what was happening and tried to terminate you, but you escaped. With Ace's help, you made it to that cabin and you've been living there ever since. But why leave me alone? Why not just kill me? Because they needed you alive, Tom said. They needed to study you, to understand what had gone wrong. You were their greatest success and their greatest failure. They couldn't afford to destroy you until they understood how to fix the process. Sarah felt sick. I'm an experiment, a failed prototype. No, Tom said firmly. You're something they never intended to create. You're Sarah Chen, but you're also more than that. You're the synthesis of her memories and experiences with something entirely new, something that can't be controlled or programmed. He stood up and moved to a wall covered with photographs and documents. The real Sarah left you something, hidden in a place that only she would know, in a way that only Ace could understand, and I think you're finally ready to find it. Tom pulled down a map of the local area, marked with dozens of locations. She scattered clues all over these mountains, breadcrumbs leading to the final cache, the one that contains the evidence that will bring down the entire operation. What kind of evidence? Names, bank accounts, communication logs, proof that Operation Lazarus isn't just about creating replacement soldiers. It's about creating a shadow army, people in positions of power who can be controlled, manipulated, replaced when necessary. Sarah stared at the map, at the dozens of locations marked with red ink. How long have you been planning this? 10 years, Tom said, ever since I realized what they'd done to you, what they'd done to all of us. He pulled out a set of keys and handed them to Sarah. The coordinates will lead you to a storage facility, Unit 47. Inside, you'll find everything the real Sarah wanted you to have, including the location of Cavern 9. Why can't you just tell me? Tom's expression darkened. Because I'm not going with you. They found me, Sarah. They know I'm here. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the forest. Tom moved to a window and peered through the blinds. Time to go, he said. Back door, through the trees. Take the trail that leads north. It'll bring you to the main road in about 2 miles. Sarah grabbed the keys and the map, stuffing them into her pack. What about you? Tom checked his weapon and moved toward the front door. I'm going to buy you some time. It's what I do. Tom, go, he said firmly. Find the truth. Expose them. Make sure Sarah's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Tom replied. Thank me when this is all over. Sarah, Lisa, and Ace slipped out the back door as the sound of vehicles grew closer. Behind them, Tom Briggs prepared to make his final stand, to protect the truth he'd spent 10 years gathering. The hunt was entering its final phase. But first, Sarah had to discover who she really was, and what the real Sarah Chen had died to protect. The storage facility was a rundown complex of metal buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence, the kind of place where people stored belongings they couldn't bear to throw away but didn't want to keep close. Unit 47 was in the back row, hidden behind larger units and accessible only through a narrow alley between buildings. Sarah used the keys Tom had given her to open the heavy padlock, then rolled up the metal door. Inside, the unit was filled with military equipment, weapons, communication gear, survival supplies, and boxes of documents. But it was the object in the center of the space that drew her attention. A motorcycle. Not a standard civilian bike, but a military spec machine designed for reconnaissance and rapid movement. Beside it sat a helmet, body armor, and a map case marked with familiar handwriting. She was planning for this, Lisa said, examining the equipment. The real Sarah. She knew you'd need to get to Cavern 9. Sarah opened the map case and found detailed plans of the facility, including guard rotations, security measures, and structural blueprints. The complex was even larger than she'd imagined, with multiple levels extending deep into the mountain. Look at this, she said, pointing to a section of the plans. Sub-Level 5. It's not on any of the other maps we've seen. Lisa studied the blueprint. What's down there? According to this, it's listed as archive storage. But look at the power requirements. This isn't just a storage facility. It's something else. Something else. Sarah found a folder marked Personnel and opened it. Inside were photographs and dossiers of dozens of people. Politicians, military officers, business leaders, all with the same notation in the margin. Replaced. Jesus, Lisa breathed. They've been doing this for years, replacing key figures with clones they can control. And if we don't stop them, Sarah said, they'll keep doing it. Forever. She loaded the motorcycle with essential supplies, then suited up in the body armor. The equipment fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored specifically for her body. Which Sarah realized it probably had been. I'm going alone, she told Lisa. Like hell you are. This is personal, between me and them. You've done enough. Lisa grabbed Sarah's arm. I've been hunting these bastards for 10 years. I'm not stopping now. Sarah looked at her friend, at the determination in her eyes. Then we do this together. All of us. She looked down at Ace, who was wearing both collars now, the old one that had seen 10 years of faithful service, and the new one that simply said, Remember. You ready for this, boy? She asked. Ace's tail wagged once, and he moved toward the motorcycle. He'd ridden with Sarah before, in another life, in another world. Some things never changed. The ride to Cavern 9 took them through increasingly remote terrain, following backroads and fire trails that weren't on any civilian map. The facility was built into the side of a mountain, its entrance hidden behind what looked like a natural rock formation. Sarah parked the motorcycle a quarter-mile from the entrance and approached on foot, using the plans from the storage unit, to avoid the security cameras and motion sensors. The place was a fortress, but the real Sarah had found its weaknesses. Guard change in 10 minutes, Sarah whispered to Lisa as they crouched behind a boulder. 2-man patrol, clockwise rotation. We'll have a 5-minute window to get inside. The plan worked perfectly. They slipped through the main entrance using security codes that were 10 years old but apparently still valid. The facility's interior was sterile and white, like a hospital or research laboratory. This way, Sarah said, consulting the map. Archive storage is 5 levels down. They moved through the facility like ghosts, avoiding the few personnel they encountered. Most of the complex seemed to be automated, with minimal human presence. But as they descended deeper into the mountain, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, and there was a smell Sarah couldn't identify. Something chemical and wrong. Sublevel 5 was different from the rest of the facility. The walls were lined with tanks filled with a clear liquid, and floating in each tank was a human form in various stages of development. Some were barely recognizable as human, while others were nearly complete. My God, Lisa whispered. It's a clone farm. Sarah moved between the tanks, studying the faces floating in the fluid. Some were familiar. She recognized several from the photographs in the personnel files. Others were strangers, but all shared the same peaceful expression of artificial sleep. At the end of the row, she found what she was looking for. A tank marked Subject 7B contained a form that was unmistakably her own face, but younger, with subtle differences that suggested ongoing refinement of the process. They're still making me, she said quietly, even after all this time. Not just you, Lisa replied. Look at this. She was standing in front of a tank marked Subject 12A. The form inside was Lisa's own face, perfect in every detail. They're planning to replace both of us, Sarah said. Probably already have replacements ready to deploy. They moved deeper into the archive, past rows of tanks and computer terminals. At the center of the space was a massive server array, its screens displaying data streams and biological readings. And sitting at the main console was a figure Sarah recognized from the photographs. Dr. Marcus Webb didn't look up as Sarah and Lisa entered the room. His hands moved across the console with a calm precision, eyes scanning biometric readings and neural activity logs as if they weren't armed. And standing 10 feet away. Welcome, he said without turning. I've been expecting you. Sarah leveled her weapon. Step away from the console. Now. Webb sighed and finally stood, turning to face them. He was in his early 60s, with thinning gray hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to hold no warmth. A white lab coat hung loosely from his narrow frame, and his ID badge read, Project Director, Lazarus Initiative. I assume you've seen the tanks, he said, gesturing to the room around them. Elegant work, isn't it? You're creating replacements for real people, Lisa snapped. There's nothing elegant about that. Webb gave a small shrug. Humanity has always sought to perfect itself. We just moved faster than E. Ethics could keep up. You murdered my entire unit, Sarah said, her voice low and deadly. You made me into this thing. You took my life. Webb's expression tightened. I didn't take your life, Sarah. I preserved it. Improved it. You erased me, she said. You created a copy and buried the truth under a mountain of lies. Webb stepped forward slightly, but Ace growled, low and deep, a sound that froze Webb in place. She still has the original bond, Webb muttered. Fascinating. Where's the list? Sarah demanded. The one Sarah Chen died for. The one that proves everything. Webb nodded toward a secure cabinet at the back of the lab. It's all there. Hard copy, of course. Too dangerous to store digitally. But it won't matter. Do you really think the world will believe the rantings of a rogue clone and a dog? Lisa stepped toward him, eyes narrowed. We have more than just that. We have photographs, journals, physical evidence, witness testimony, and if even one person listens, the rest will follow. Webb looked at her with a faint trace of pity. And what happens after? Governments collapse. Trust in institutions vanishes. You don't want justice, you want chaos. No, Sarah said firmly, we want truth and accountability. AU. Sudden alarm blared overhead. Red lights flashed as automated lockdown procedures initiated. They've found us, Lisa said. Webb smiled. Of course they have. You didn't think I'd let you walk in here without contingencies. But he hadn't counted on Ace. The German Shepherd lunged at Webb with a speed and precision honed over years of combat. Webb collapsed under the weight of the dog, and in the confusion, Sarah dashed to the cabinet and retrieved the list. Ikoi. Thick folder with top secret, eyes only stamped across it. Let's move, Lisa shouted, covering their exit as Sarah secured the folder in her pack. Ace released Webb with a final growl and bolted after Sarah and Lisa as they ran through the maze of hallways, alarms screaming around them. Reinforcements were arriving. Doors slammed shut. But they had the one thing Webb never expected anyone to reach. The truth. And now, Sarah knew exactly what to do with it.